Hey everyone, my name is Michael Coker and I'm the mayor of the city of Mulberry. And today I'm going to give you a behind the scenes look at what happens at city council meetings in Mulberry. So basically, when a city council meeting is called, it's basically put on a calendar, and then ultimately there's an agenda that's published. And that agenda is posted online and circulated among the council. So we know ahead of time about what items are going to be discussed at that council meeting. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of an insider view of what happens at city council meetings, the process, the the ways that you can get involved or be a part of them. And even if you're unable to come visit, how you can access those city council meetings and see for yourself exactly how they happen and stay up to date. So city council meetings are called generally about every 1 to 2 times per month. Typically, we try to hold them every other week, but we are actually going to once a month come the summertime. So for things like the summer, sometimes if there's school holidays or those items, it might change the schedule. But typically, it happens about 1 to 2 times per month. And so those are preset. And so you can go on our website, you can see a complete list of all of the city council meetings that are currently scheduled, and you can add them to your calendar so you can follow along as well. And so those are set. And then the next thing that happens is that we are provided with that agenda. And the agenda is basically a list of all the items that we are going to discuss at that city council meeting. Now, those agendas are also made public, so you can follow along, you can look at them, you can see if there's anything relevant to you to decide whether or not you want to attend or follow that particular city council meeting. But that agenda is published, and that is kind of the starting point of how the council meets. And so ultimately, we start all of our city council meetings about 6:30 p.m. And basically we try to start right on time. And so basically what happens is ultimately these city council meetings become the working sessions for the city council to make decisions for the city. And so typically at the start, we'll do what's called a roll call. And I usually call the roll where I make sure that we have what's called a quorum. And in order for the city council to operate, we have to have what's called a quorum or a majority of the city council members present. So if we call a meeting and let's say 3 of the city council members are gone or not going to be able to attend, just those 2 city council members cannot basically meet and conduct business because they don't have what's called a quorum. And so as long as we have 3 out of our 5 city council members present, we are able to continue and to conduct business. And so we've had some meetings where, maybe somebody's out of town or this or that, and we have had as little as 3 before. But you'll never see a city council meeting with only 2 or 1 members because that's not a quorum and they are not authorized to conduct business. So once that roll is called and we determine that we have a quorum and that we're authorized to conduct business, generally we'll do things like an invocation and we'll say the pledge just to get us started. And then after that, we'll have opening comments from the council. And so typically, me as the mayor will make a couple statements, or maybe I want to communicate some things to the public of what's been going on in the city. We'll have the other council members that'll make some statements. And then generally the city manager, Mr. Jamie Palmer, will also have some comments, just things that the public needs to know or maybe wants to know about the workings of the city. And then so after those public comments happen, after we have those council member comments and the city manager comments, we get to what's called the public comment section. The public comment section of a city council meeting is your opportunity to stand up and have your voice be heard. And all you need to do is show up, sign up. We ask you to tell us your name, where you live, your address, and which district you live in the city, just so we know. But it's your opportunity to show up and to express your wishes or desires or even your frustrations if there are some with the city. And so you're limited in this public comment section usually to 2 minutes. So each individual has 2 minutes to get up, to address the council, to speak with them. Now, one of the most kind of confusing things is some people think this is the opportunity to get up and to ask questions of the city council. Typically, we are not authorized to answer questions during public comment. This is your opportunity to be heard, to express your opinion, but it's generally not the time to ask questions. The best way to ask questions of the council is either before or after the meeting. We always stick around. We always talk to everyone after. So if you have a specific question about how things are operating, or maybe it's a specific issue that you're facing, those would be great things for you to ask your individual council representatives after the meeting, not during public comments. And so we go through that list and we go through every one of those public comments. We let whoever wants to speak stand up and speak. And then once we have no additional people on the list, we go ahead and we close the public comments. After that is typically what's called the action items. Now, action items could be anything. It could be approving a new contract for the city. It could be discussing some rezonings that are happening in the city. It could even be things like maybe hiring a new city employee or talking about an issue. Sometimes we have action items that we have to vote on, where we actually call a vote. And if the vote has a majority of the council members, meaning 3 out of the 5, that means that it passes. It also, sometimes we have just discussion items. So sometimes there's no need for a vote. It's just an item on the agenda that we need to talk about. We need to kind of work out or maybe kind of strategize of how we're going to move forward in the future. So those action items have those two things, both the motions and the votes, as well as the discussions. Now, one of the funny things that people ask me all the time is that, how does it work? I mean, you might hear me up there say, okay, at this time I'll entertain a motion, or do we have a second, or is there any discussion? So those are aspects of something called Robert's Rules. And Robert's Rules are basically a set of rules that basically a standard set for governments or any sort of governing body. So these are not just used by city councils or by, county commissioners. These are also used by nonprofit boards or corporate boards. It's just a formal way to ensure order and to make sure that the process proceeds smoothly. And so when a specific council member wants to make what's called a motion, they do so. So they would say, like, let's say that someone wanted to make a motion to permit a, new tree ordinance to be approved. So basically, that individual council member would say, at this time, I'd like to make a motion to approve the ordinance, whatever number it is, pertaining to the trees. So at that point, we have what's called a motion on the table. That means that the city council is obligated to consider that motion and to discuss it. Now, once that motion is made, before any discussion can happen and before it can be considered, we also have to have what's called a second. And a second is just a second council representative or council member who agrees that this is an important topic that we need to discuss. And so you'll hear, does anyone have a motion? And then you'll have a council member make the motion. Then you'll hear me say, do I have a second? And then you'll have presumably another council member say second. That means we have the motion, we have the second, and the item needs to be put for a discussion. At this point, I typically say, is there any discussion? Now, sometimes we've already discussed all the items prior to the motion. And so sometimes there's no need for additional discussion. But you'll always hear me reserve that extra opportunity just to make sure that everyone in the group has been heard and they've stated their opinion of the motion. And so you have the motion, you have the second, then you have any additional discussion. And if there's none, that's when the mayor or the leader of the session will call a vote. And so at that point, I'll call a vote, all in favor, and then whoever's in favor will raise their hand. All opposed, and then they'll raise their hand, and then I'll call out the answer. So I'll say, like, the motion carries 3-2, or it's unanimous, the motion passes, or it's 4-2, the motion fails. And so I will call those out, and then basically the clerk will keep good notes of those action items. Well, let's say you want to know how your specific council member voted on an issue. Let's say you missed the meeting. Let's say you couldn't be there in person. Well, there's really 2 ways you can go back and figure out what happened. Number one is you can go forward and you can basically take a look at the live stream. So we put all of our council meetings on YouTube, and we basically post them. So you can go watch all the discussion, you can go watch all of the votes, and you can know exactly how your council member voted. But let's say it's even hard to tell. Sometimes the camera's set up, you can't see who raised their hand and who didn't. The second way you can do that is the clerk posts all of our meeting minutes online. And so you can go line by line and you can see every single agenda item, every single vote, and exactly who voted for what item. And that's a great way for you to know whether the motion passed, whether the ordinance passed, and whether or not your council member voted in favor or against that item. Now, one of the things that people ask a lot is, can an agenda ever be amended? Can there be items that are added to the agenda after the fact, even after there's after it's been published to the public? And the answer is yes. So additional agenda items can be added if needed and when needed. And so occasionally you'll see us do that. Now, I will tell you, we do try to include the agenda items as much as possible in the initial one that's published to the public. So we want you to know what's going to be discussed and what items are on there. But sometimes circumstances do arise where there is a new agenda item that pops up that needs to be addressed. And so, yes, an agenda can be amended. And so that's kind of how the action item sections work. And then typically towards the end of our council meetings, there's another thing which is called an executive session. And this is something that is somewhat confusing to people and they don't always understand. But Georgia law allows a city council to meet in private over in very limited circumstances, or to discuss very few things. Things like litigation. Okay, so if the city's being sued, obviously, if the city members are going to speak to their lawyers, we do not want to have that open to the public, because those communications are what's called privileged, meaning the public doesn't get to hear them. And there's a lot of times there's some trial strategy that's going on, right? Some strategy of how we're going to deal with this litigation. So the idea is that Georgia says, hey, it's okay for a city council to discuss litigation in private in an executive session. Another one is real estate acquisitions. Let's say the city's going to acquire some sort of new real estate, obviously so that individual doesn't raise the price, against the city, knowing that the city's going to bid on a particular piece of property. That can be discussed in private. There's a couple other ones too, like let's say the city's going to discuss the employment of one of the city workers or city employees. And then also things like cybersecurity. I mean, that's obvious, right? If the city's going to implement new cybersecurity tactics or techniques, we're not going to publish those out to the public so that, some hacker can know exactly what's going to happen. And so that's just a few of those exceptions to the open meetings rules, which state that the city council is allowed to meet about those things in that private executive session. If it does not fall under one of those examples, those exceptions, then you are required, basically as a individual, the city council is required to meet in public. And so it's supposed to be open to the public. It's supposed to be something that the public can see and witness and be a part of. And so those particular instances, unless it meets one of those few exceptions for executive session, then ultimately it needs to continue to be in an open meeting. And so that kind of explains to you kind of the process for a city council meeting. So like I said, it starts with the roll call, the invocation, and the pledge, kind of moves into the comments of the council, public comment, ultimately kind of moves into those action items, then the executive session, and then typically for our council meetings, after we return from executive session, the meeting is usually adjourned. Now, sometimes we might have one or two additional items we have to discuss, sometimes from the executive session, but generally that's the end of our meetings. And then after the meeting's over, like I told you, that's when we usually stick around for another 10, 15 minutes and kind of talk to members of the community, get their thoughts, answer their questions they might have. At most of our meetings, our city manager is there, our community development director is there, so it's another great opportunity for you to engage with them. If you have a question, if you have a concern you want to discuss, that's the time. That's the time to come up. We love talking to constituents, hearing your thoughts, hearing your opinions, and kind of, hearing your ideas for what the future of the city may hold. So let's say you can't make it to our city council meetings, and that's totally fine. We understand that life happens and sometimes they're difficult to get to. You can always watch our city council meetings on YouTube, either through the live stream or after the fact when they're posted. This will give you the opportunity to watch and see exactly what's happening at the city council meetings and to stay up to date for what's happening within our city. And so I would encourage you, come attend a city council meeting. Come sit and listen. Come give a public comment if there's something you want to discuss or if you have an idea that you think might benefit the city. And then also, follow along, follow those meetings, follow those live streams, and just continue to stay engaged with the city. Because when we have a community that works together and, we put our head down and we work as hard as we can to make this community the best that it possibly can be, that ultimately is what's best for Mulberry, and it's what's best for each of us. Your 5 city council members, we can't do this all on our own. And so we need you. We need your support. We need your help. We need your ideas. And more importantly, we need to all come together and work together as a community to continue to do what's best for our city and to continue to work for future generations that will live in Mulberry. And so if you like this podcast, if you like getting updates and hearing more about the city, how things operate, and kind of getting a behind the scenes look of what happens at City Hall, be sure to like and subscribe and continue to watch these podcasts. I'll try to put them out as periodically as I can, but I appreciate you listening. I appreciate your time. And as always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.